All right, Bob?
Well, let me also say just a word about John Brandt. We weren't supposed to because, we're supposed to move right into our topics, but I knew John for a long, long time and considered him to be a real close and dear friend, gentleman of great integrity, and without question, he is missed today and would very much like to have him in the room with us today. This issue area that we're working on or that we're talking about today is obviously a very rapidly evolving issue area, and particularly the public side or the private side of this data issue. You know, at the federal level, we've had decades to kind of figure out how we're going to handle, individual privacy issues, how we're going to handle anonymizing the data, things of that nature. But we're really kind of just at the leading edge of that, if you will, on the private side of this issue. I'd also say that the commercial market is frankly changing faster, frankly, than we can get the crop planted. I strongly suspect that the rules and provisions and everything else that we're going to have in place for these private data issues are going to be completely different for the 2015 crop than they are for the 2014 crop. And by the time we get out to 2018, we probably have no clue what those rules are going to look like. So this is a very rapidly evolving area that we're talking about at this stage of the game. I will say that because it's so rapidly evolving, there's a lot of work going on in the background to try to determine the principles and rules, et cetera, that are going to apply to some of this commercial world. And probably the most important issue is this whole one of data ownership. And for that matter, we probably need to have a lot of conversation about what the term ownership actually means when it comes to this data front. Who is it that captures the value of my data, for example? Do I capture the value of that data? If we end up with multiple thousands of observations or whatever off of a number of farms, again, it's just data at that stage of the game. It does require some analysis, does require some work to be able to create the same kind of graphs that Mary's already talked about. We also need to talk about secondary and tertiary uses of my data. Who is it, what happens down the road? I mean, yes, I've signed a contract with the original company. What happens to those second folks and third folks, et cetera? How do I pull my data back out if I decide I want to make something along those lines occur? I would say probably one thing that AFBF will, and I strongly suspect most of the grower associations will also fall in line with that, is to say that, if a company says one thing in their principles documents in terms of how the data, they say they're going to handle their data, the contract that the producer then signs, the individual producer signs with them, better say pretty much those same things. I think as we go through some contracts, we may find that at this point in time, that's not necessarily the case as we work on things today. Data privacy and control, as I've talked about already, is going to be a very important issue as we roll forward. And how we, again, anonymize the data, which is a very, again, something that NASS has worked on for a long time and has very strict and stringent rules on how they apply that. And I think farmers, for the most part, understand that and respect that NASS will stick to those rules because they have been so good about it. I will say there may be a few other federal agencies, maybe not tied to USDA, that have not been quite as good about anonymizing that data. And then frankly, some of that stuff that's happened in the not too distant past, I think, is causing a great deal of the angst right now when it comes to data privacy and how that's going to move forward. And in particular, how the data privacy with respect to the federal government or other outside groups, is the data foiable? I think almost every meeting that we end up having with producers at this stage of the game is if we end up providing this data to some particular company that ends up moving into some federal agency in some way or another, is that data going to be foiable? And why are we worrying about this had we not had some federal agencies that release data in times past? I will say that, as we talk about this, the commercialization of some of this data and turning some of the data from data into information, this is can be a very significant market issue. But also, I think, lays out what the really critical role is for USDA or for public data sources. USDA at this stage of the game samples, and we can probably have that conversation, samples production as opposed to the big data approach where we're pretty well going to have the entire universe in our hands when it comes time for us to understand or make guesses as to what the production levels happen to be. So that's clearly an area where I think USDA, I'm sure already is and will, they've changed their approaches, changed their techniques when it comes to yield estimations in times past, and I have no doubt that we'll make those adjustments as we move forward. I would say that, though, as we've talked about, USDA does have a tremendous role to play as the referee, as being that kind of neutral third party that says, we've looked through all the data, and our best guess on corn production this year is, 13.978 billion bushels. There's value in having a third party, independent, completely objective group out there putting those numbers on the table, as opposed to what I'm reasonably sure we'll have in the not too distant future. It's probably very accurate, very timely yield data that's updated on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis, as opposed to the monthly approach that USDA uses. I'd also say that we talked a lot about NASS, we talked a lot about ERS, and they're great agencies, and I don't want them to think otherwise, but AMS is actually in the middle of their 99th year of collecting the data that they pull together, and they do great work as well in terms of pulling data together and making that and really transforming big data into usable information that we can talk about moving forward with. I'd also say, CFAIR itself has done work in this area in the past in terms of looking at the value of publicly collected or publicly collected data. And again, I think just really nailed or drove home that point that there is a real true value for publicly accessible and publicly analyzed data as we roll forward. With that, Sarah, I'll shut up.